Marcus Williams stood frozen in the doorway of his mother's elegant dining room, watching something that would change his life forever. His fiancée Jessica was supposed to be helping his elderly mother prepare for their engagement dinner, but instead, she was doing something that made his blood run cold. "You stupid old woman," Jessica hissed at 72-year-old Eleanor Williams, who was sitting in her wheelchair, trying to reach for her medication on the high shelf. "Can't you do anything right? No wonder Marcus feels trapped taking care of you." Eleanor's hands shook as she struggled to grab her heart pills. The stroke she'd suffered 6 months ago had left her partially paralyzed on her left side, but her mind remained sharp. She said nothing, just kept reaching with trembling fingers. Jessica rolled her eyes and deliberately moved the pill bottle higher. "Maybe if you weren't such a burden, Marcus and I could actually start our real life together. But no, we're stuck babysitting you in this dusty old house." Marcus felt his chest tighten. He'd been dating Jessica for 2 years, and she'd always been sweet and caring around his mother. At least that's what he thought. He was about to step forward when he noticed someone else watching from the kitchen doorway. Ruby Johnson had worked for the Williams family for 15 years. She was a 60-year-old black woman with kind eyes and gentle hands who had become like family to both Marcus and his mother. Ruby had helped Eleanor through her husband's death 5 years ago, and she'd been a godsend during Eleanor's recovery from the stroke. Ruby's face showed no emotion as she watched Jessica's cruel behavior, but Marcus could see something calculating in her eyes. She stepped back into the kitchen silently, as if she hadn't seen anything at all. Jessica continued her verbal assault on Eleanor. "Honestly, I don't know how Marcus turned out so successful with such a pathetic mother. When we're married, things are going to change around here. We're putting you in one of those homes where you belong." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, but she remained silent. She'd always been a proud woman, and Marcus knew she was trying to maintain her dignity even in this horrible moment. "And don't think that maid of yours is going to protect you," Jessica added, with a nasty laugh. "Ruby's just the help. Once I'm Mrs. Williams, she'll be gone too. We don't need some old black woman hanging around pretending to be family." That's when Marcus saw Ruby step back into the room, carrying a fresh pitcher of water. Her face was calm and pleasant, as if she hadn't heard a single word. But Marcus caught the brief look she gave him. She knew he was there, watching everything. "Miss Jessica," Ruby said in her soft, respectful voice, "would you like me to help Mrs. Eleanor with her medication? I know exactly which pills she needs and when." Jessica spun around, her face flushing red. For a moment, Marcus thought she might continue her cruel behavior in front of Ruby, but instead, she forced a fake smile. "Oh, Ruby, I didn't see you there. Yes, please help her. I was just trying to encourage her to be more independent, you know, for her own good." Ruby nodded and moved to Eleanor's side with practiced ease. "Of course, Miss Jessica, Mrs. Eleanor. Let me get those pills for you, honey." As Ruby gently helped Eleanor with her medication, Marcus watched Jessica's face transform back into the sweet, caring expression he thought he knew so well. It was like watching someone put on a mask. "Marcus should be home soon," Jessica said, checking her watch. "I want everything to be perfect for our engagement dinner. This is such an important night for our future together." Ruby simply nodded and continued caring for Eleanor, who looked up at her with grateful eyes. The two women had developed their own quiet communication over the years, and Marcus could see they understood each other perfectly. After Jessica left the room to fix her makeup, Ruby helped Eleanor into her favorite chair by the window. Marcus was about to step forward and reveal himself when he heard Ruby speak in a low voice. "Don't you worry, Mrs. Eleanor. I've been watching that girl for months now. She thinks she's clever, but she doesn't know who she's dealing with. That young man of yours deserves to know the truth about the woman he's planning to marry." Eleanor reached out and squeezed Ruby's hand. "Ruby, dear, I don't want to cause problems between Marcus and Jessica. Maybe I am just a burden." "Hush now," Ruby said firmly but gently. "You raised a good man who loves and respects you. He deserves a woman who will love and respect you too. Miss Jessica is not that woman, and it's time Marcus learned that." Marcus felt his world tilting. Everything he thought he knew about his relationship was crashing down around him. Jessica, the woman he'd planned to spend his life with, had been abusing his beloved mother behind his back. And Ruby, faithful Ruby, had been protecting his mother while he remained completely unaware. He thought about all the times Jessica had made excuses not to visit when Ruby wasn't around. All the times his mother had seemed quieter or more withdrawn after Jessica's visits. All the small signs he'd missed because he was blinded by what he thought was love. As he stood there processing this revelation, Marcus realized that Ruby had known all along. She'd been waiting, watching, and protecting his mother while gathering evidence of Jessica's true character. The question now was, what was Ruby planning to do about it? The engagement dinner was supposed to start in 2 hours. Family and friends were coming to celebrate what they thought would be a joyful occasion, but Marcus now knew that this evening would be anything but celebratory. He quietly stepped back from the doorway, his mind racing. Should he confront Jessica immediately? Should he call off the dinner? Should he trust that Ruby had a plan? One thing was certain. His mother had been suffering in silence, and the woman he loved had been the cause of that suffering. Ruby had been the only one standing between Eleanor and Jessica's cruelty, and Marcus felt overwhelming gratitude mixed with shame that he hadn't seen it himself. As he heard footsteps approaching, Marcus quickly moved away from the dining room. He needed time to think, to process what he'd witnessed. But he also knew that whatever happened next, Ruby Johnson was about to play a crucial role in his family's future. The evening ahead would change everything, and Marcus had a feeling that the quiet, dignified woman who had served his family so faithfully was about to show everyone exactly what she was made of. Marcus retreated to his childhood bedroom upstairs, his hands shaking as he closed the door behind him. The room hadn't changed much since high school. His basketball trophies still lined the shelves, and his mother had kept his bed made with the same blue comforter he'd had in college. But everything felt different now. He sat on the edge of the bed trying to make sense of what he'd just witnessed. How long had Jessica been treating his mother this way? How many times had she been cruel when he wasn't around? And most importantly, how had he been so blind to it all? Marcus pulled out his phone and stared at Jessica's contact information. Her photo smiled back at him, the same beautiful smile that had captivated him when they first met at a charity fundraiser 2 years ago. She'd seemed perfect then, intelligent, successful, charming. She worked in marketing for a prestigious firm downtown and had impressed everyone she met. But now he wondered if everything about their relationship had been a performance. Downstairs, he could hear the familiar sounds of Ruby preparing for the dinner party. Pots and pans clinked softly in the kitchen, and he caught the aroma of her famous honey-glazed ham drifting up the stairs. Ruby had been making that ham for every important family gathering since Marcus was 12 years old. His father had hired Ruby when Marcus was in 7th grade. His mother, Eleanor, had been overwhelmed trying to manage the household while working part-time at the local library. Ruby had started as just a housekeeper, but she quickly became so much more. She'd helped with homework, attended school plays, and even taught Marcus how to tie a proper necktie before his first job interview, when his father died suddenly of a heart attack 5 years ago. Ruby had been the one to hold the family together. She'd organized the funeral, helped with the legal paperwork, and stayed late every night for weeks just to make sure Eleanor wasn't alone with her grief. Marcus realized now that Ruby had probably seen Jessica's true nature from the very beginning. Ruby was observant and protective of the people she loved. She would have noticed the subtle changes in Eleanor's behavior, the way his mother became more withdrawn after Jessica's visits. A soft knock on his bedroom door interrupted his thoughts. "Marcus, honey," it was Ruby's gentle voice. "Can I come in?" He opened the door to find Ruby standing in the hallway, holding a cup of the chamomile tea she always made when someone in the family was upset. "I brought you some tea," she said, stepping into the room. "You look like you could use it." Marcus accepted the cup gratefully. Ruby's tea had comforted him through breakups, bad grades, and job rejections over the years. But this situation was different from anything he'd faced before. "Ruby," he said quietly, "I saw what happened downstairs." Ruby nodded slowly and sat down in the old rocking chair by his window, the same chair she'd used to read him stories when he was sick as a child. "I figured you might have," she said calmly. "You always were good at being quiet when you needed to be." "How long has this been going on?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ruby was quiet for a long moment, choosing her words carefully. "Miss Jessica showed her true colors about 6 months ago, right after your mama's stroke. I think," She saw an opportunity when your mother became more vulnerable. Marcus felt sick to his stomach. While he'd been working long hours at his accounting firm, trying to make partner so he could better provide for his family, Jessica had been tormenting his recovering mother. At first, it was just little things, Ruby continued. She'd make comments about how the house was too old-fashioned, how your mama's medication schedule was inconvenient for their dinner plans. Then it got worse. "Why didn't you tell me?" Marcus asked, though he already suspected he knew the answer. "Your mama made me promise not to," Ruby said sadly. "She didn't want to cause problems between you and Miss Jessica. She kept hoping things would get better, that maybe Miss Jessica was just stressed about the wedding planning." Marcus set down his teacup and buried his face in his hands. "I should have seen it. I should have protected her." "Baby, you can't blame yourself for this," Ruby said firmly, using the same tone she'd used to comfort him as a child. "Miss Jessica is very good at pretending to be someone she's not. She fooled a lot of people, not just you." "But you weren't fooled," Marcus said, looking up at her. Ruby's expression hardened slightly. "I've seen people like Miss Jessica before, pretty on the outside, ugly on the inside. They think they can treat people badly because they believe some folks don't matter as much as others." Marcus knew Ruby was referring not just to how Jessica treated his mother, but also to the dismissive way Jessica had always spoken to Ruby herself. He'd noticed that Jessica never said please or thank you to Ruby, never acknowledged her as anything more than hired help. But he'd rationalized it as Jessica being focused on other things, not intentional rudeness. "What are you going to do?" Marcus asked. Ruby smiled, and there was something almost mischievous in her expression. "Well, that depends on what you're going to do, honey. This is your life, your choice to make. But I will say this, your mama deserves better, and so do you." Before Marcus could respond, they heard Jessica's voice calling from downstairs. "Marcus? Darling, where are you? The caterers are here, and I need your help with something." Ruby stood up smoothly. "The guests will start arriving in about an hour," she said. "Your cousin David is coming and your mama's friend Mrs. Patterson from the library. Your boss, Mr. Henderson, and his wife will be here too." Marcus nodded. He'd invited his boss specifically because he'd been hoping the dinner would help solidify his chances for the promotion he'd been working toward. "Ruby," he said as she reached the door, "whatever you're planning, please be careful. I don't want you to get in trouble because of this situation." Ruby turned back to him with a gentle smile. "Don't you worry about me, baby. I've been taking care of this family for 15 years, and I'm not about to stop now. Sometimes the people we love need protection, even when they don't ask for it." After Ruby left, Marcus sat alone with his thoughts for several more minutes. Through his window, he could see the caterers setting up tables in the backyard. String. Lights twinkled between the oak trees his father had planted when Marcus was born. Everything looked perfect for a celebration, but Marcus knew that by the end of the evening nothing would be the same. He heard more voices downstairs. The florists had arrived to arrange the centerpieces Jessica had ordered. Soon, the house would be full of family and friends, all expecting to toast his engagement to a woman he now realized he didn't really know at all. Marcus finished his tea and stood up, looking at himself in the mirror above his dresser. He looked the same as he had that morning, but he felt completely different. In the span of an hour, his entire understanding of his life had shifted. The question now was whether he had the courage to act on what he'd learned, and whether he could trust Ruby to help him navigate the most difficult evening of his life. Marcus finally made his way downstairs, putting on the best smile he could manage. The house was buzzing with activity, as caterers arranged food on elegant serving platters and florists placed white roses and baby's breath in crystal vases throughout the main floor. Jessica had spared no expense in planning what she called the engagement party of the decade. "There you are." Jessica rushed over to him, looking stunning in a flowing emerald dress that complemented her auburn hair. "I was starting to worry. The photographer will be here soon, and I want to get some pictures with your mother before the guests arrive." Marcus nodded stiffly, watching as Jessica transformed back into the charming, caring woman everyone else knew. She linked her arm through his and guided him toward the living room where Eleanor sat in her wheelchair, wearing the navy blue dress Ruby had helped her select for the occasion. "Doesn't your mother look lovely?" Jessica said sweetly, loud enough for Ruby to hear from the kitchen. "I helped her choose that dress. I thought the color would bring out her eyes." Eleanor smiled politely, but Marcus could see the tension in her shoulders. His mother had always been an excellent judge of character, and now he realized she'd been trying to protect him by not speaking up about Jessica's behavior. Ruby appeared in the doorway, carrying a tray of Eleanor's medications. "Mrs. Eleanor, it's time for your evening pills," she said gently. "Oh, Ruby," Jessica said with an exaggerated sigh. "Couldn't that wait until after the photographs? We want Eleanor to look natural and relaxed, not like she's taking medicine." "The doctor was very specific about the timing," Ruby replied calmly, meeting Jessica's gaze directly. "Mrs. Eleanor's heart medication needs to be taken exactly on schedule." Marcus watched this exchange carefully. Jessica's mask slipped just slightly. Her smile became a little too tight, her voice a little too sharp. "Of course. You're absolutely right," Jessica said, though her tone suggested she felt anything but agreeable. "Family health comes first, doesn't it?" As Ruby helped Eleanor with her medications, Marcus noticed how his mother relaxed under Ruby's gentle care. The contrast between Ruby's genuine kindness and Jessica's performed concern was striking now that he knew what to look for. The doorbell rang, and the first guests began arriving. Marcus's cousin David came in with his wife Sarah, followed by several family friends and Eleanor's former colleagues from the library. His boss, Mr. Henderson, arrived fashionably late with an expensive bottle of champagne. Everyone gathered in the living room, admiring the decorations and congratulating Marcus and Jessica on their upcoming wedding. Jessica was in her element, graciously accepting compliments and sharing details about their wedding plans. "We're thinking of a destination wedding," she told Mrs. Patterson, Eleanor's closest friend from the library. "Somewhere tropical and romantic. Of course, we'll have to make arrangements for Eleanor's care while we're gone, but I'm sure we can find a nice facility for her." Marcus saw his mother's face pale at the mention of being placed in a facility, and he caught Ruby's sharp look from across the room. Mrs. Patterson, who had known Eleanor for over 20 years, looked confused. "A facility?" Mrs. Patterson asked. "But Eleanor, I thought you loved living in this house. You always said you wanted to stay here as long as possible." "Oh, she does," Jessica answered before Eleanor could speak. "But we have to be realistic about what's best for everyone. As Eleanor's condition progresses, she'll need more specialized care than we can provide at home." Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she gripped the arms of her wheelchair. Marcus realized that Jessica was publicly discussing plans that had never been discussed with him or his mother. Ruby moved smoothly through the room, offering appetizers and refilling drinks. But Marcus could see she was listening to every word. When she reached Eleanor's side, she quietly whispered something that made his mother sit up a little straighter. The photographer arrived and began organizing group shots. Jessica insisted on numerous pictures of just herself and Marcus, then reluctantly included Eleanor in a few family photos. Throughout the session, she kept making subtle comments about Eleanor's posture and expressions. "Maybe try to smile more naturally, Eleanor," Jessica suggested with false sweetness. "We want these photos to show how happy our family is." During dinner, Jessica positioned herself as the perfect hostess, regaling guests with stories about her work and their wedding plans. She painted a picture of their future that seemed to have very little room for Eleanor, beyond the occasional visit to whatever care facility Jessica had in mind. Marcus barely touched his food, watching the performance with growing disgust. How had he ever thought this woman loved him? Everything about her behavior seemed calculated to impress their guests while subtly establishing her vision for their future, a future that clearly didn't include his mother, living with them. Ruby served each course flawlessly, anticipating everyone's needs with the grace and professionalism she'd shown for 15 years. But Marcus noticed that she was watching Jessica more intently than usual, as if she were waiting for something specific to happen. As dessert was being served, Jessica stood up with her champagne glass ready to make a toast. "I just want to thank everyone for celebrating this special evening with us," she began, her voice carrying easily through the dining room. "Marcus and I are so excited about our future together. We have such wonderful plans, a beautiful wedding, maybe starting a family soon, and of course, making some necessary changes to create the life we've always dreamed of. The guests raised their glasses, smiling and nodding approvingly. But Marcus saw Ruby pause in the doorway between the dining room and kitchen, holding a serving tray and watching Jessica with laser focus. Change is never easy, Jessica continued, looking directly at Eleanor. But sometimes it's necessary for everyone's happiness and well-being. Some people might resist change at first, but I know that ultimately, everyone will see that our decisions come from a place of love and practicality. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, and Mrs. Patterson reached over to squeeze her hand. Marcus felt his anger rising. Jessica was essentially announcing his mother's exile from her own home in front of all their friends and family, disguising it as concern for Eleanor's welfare. Ruby stepped forward slightly, and Marcus saw something shift in her expression. The polite, deferential mask she usually wore around guests was beginning to slip, revealing something much more determined underneath. Yes, Jessica continued, warming to her theme. Marcus and I believe that every family member should be in the place where they can receive the best possible care. Sometimes that means making difficult decisions, but that's what love requires, putting someone's needs ahead of our own comfort. The room was quiet, with guests nodding politely, though a few looked somewhat uncomfortable with the direction of Jessica's speech. Marcus realized this was the moment Ruby had been waiting for. Jessica had just publicly announced her intention to remove Eleanor from her own home, framing it as an act of love and necessity. Ruby set down her serving tray and moved toward the dining table, her posture straight and her eyes fixed on Jessica with unmistakable purpose. Marcus could practically feel the energy in the room shift as Ruby, prepared to do whatever she had been planning all along the evening, was about to take a turn that none of the guests, and especially not Jessica, could have anticipated. Ruby moved with quiet confidence toward the dining table, her presence commanding attention even though she hadn't said a word. Marcus watched, his heart pounding, as Jessica continued her toast, completely unaware of what was about to unfold. "So let's raise our glasses," Jessica said, holding her champagne high, "to new beginnings and making the right choices for everyone we love." The guests began to lift their glasses, but Ruby's clear, strong voice cut through the room before anyone could drink. "Excuse me, Miss Jessica," Ruby said politely but firmly, "but I think there might be some confusion about those plans you just mentioned." Every head in the room turned toward Ruby. Jessica's smile faltered slightly, clearly not expecting to be interrupted by the help during her moment of triumph. "Ruby," Jessica said with forced sweetness, "this really isn't the appropriate time. We're in the middle of a toast." "Oh, I think this is exactly the right time," Ruby replied, moving closer to the table. "Especially since you just told all these nice people that putting Mrs. Eleanor in a facility comes from love and wanting what's best for her." Marcus could feel the tension in the room rising. His boss, Mr. Henderson, looked confused, while Mrs. Patterson and the other guests seemed to sense that something significant was happening. Ruby reached into the pocket of her crisp white apron and pulled out a small digital recorder, the kind people used for taking voice memos. Marcus's eyes widened as he realized what Ruby had been doing. "You see," Ruby continued conversationally, "I've been taking care of this family for 15 years, and I've learned that sometimes people say one thing in public and something completely different in private." Jessica's face went pale. "Ruby, I don't know what you think you're doing, but I'm protecting the people I love," Ruby said simply. "Just like I always have." She pressed play on the recorder and Jessica's voice filled the dining room, crystal clear and unmistakably cruel. "You stupid old woman, can't you do anything right? No wonder Marcus feels trapped taking care of you." The guests gasped audibly. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth while Mrs. Patterson looked horrified. Marcus watched Jessica's face cycle through shock, panic, and then desperate calculation. That's not," Jessica stammered, but Ruby pressed play again. "Maybe if you weren't such a burden, Marcus and I could actually start our real life together. But no, we're stuck babysitting you in this dusty old house." Mr. Henderson set down his champagne glass with a sharp clink. David's wife Sarah made a small sound of disgust. The room was completely silent except for Jessica's recorded voice continuing its assault. "When we're married, things are going to change around here. We're putting you in one of those homes where you belong. And don't think that maid of yours is going to protect you. Ruby's just the help. Once I'm Mrs. Williams, she'll be gone too. We don't need some old black woman hanging around pretending to be family. The last comment hit the room like a physical blow. Marcus saw his cousin David's face flush with anger. Ruby had been like a grandmother to David's children, always remembered their birthdays, always had cookies ready when they visited. Ruby clicked off the recorder and looked calmly around the room. I started carrying this about 3 months ago, she said matter-of-factly, after Miss Jessica's visits became more intense. I wanted to make sure that if anything happened to Mrs. Eleanor while I wasn't here, there would be evidence of how she was really being treated. Jessica finally found her voice high and desperate. You can't. This is illegal. You can't record people without their permission. Actually, said Mr. Henderson, who Marcus suddenly remembered was a lawyer before becoming an accounting firm partner. In this state, only one party needs to consent to recording a conversation. If Ruby was present during these interactions, the recordings are perfectly legal. Ruby nodded at Mr. Henderson respectfully. Thank you, sir. I did check on that before I started. I also have recordings from several other occasions if anyone needs to hear them. Jessica looked frantically around the room, searching for any sympathetic face. She found none. Even the photographer, who had been quietly taking candid shots throughout the evening, had stopped shooting and was staring at her with undisguised disgust. Marcus, Jessica pleaded, turning to him with tears in her eyes. You have to believe me. I was stressed about the wedding planning, and your mother's condition is difficult to handle. I never meant those things I said, but Marcus was looking at his mother, who had tears streaming down her face. Not tears of sadness, but tears of relief. For the first time in months, Eleanor looked like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Actually, Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying clearly through the silent room. I heard it myself. I was standing in the doorway this afternoon watching you abuse my mother. Jessica's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. You were there? I saw everything, Marcus continued, standing up from his chair. I watched you deliberately put her medication out of reach. I heard you call her a burden. I watched you torment a woman who has never done anything but welcome you into our family. Ruby moved to stand beside Eleanor's wheelchair, placing a protective hand on the older woman's shoulder. The gesture was so natural, so full of genuine care, that it highlighted the stark difference between real love and Jessica's performance. Mrs. Patterson stood up abruptly. Eleanor, dear, I am so sorry. If I had known... She looked at Jessica with contempt. How dare you treat her this way? Eleanor Williams is one of the kindest, most generous women I've ever known. Other guests began murmuring agreement. David approached his Aunt Eleanor and knelt beside her wheelchair. Aunt Ellie, why didn't you tell us? We would have helped. Eleanor finally found her voice, though it shook with emotion. I didn't want to cause trouble between Marcus and Jessica. I thought maybe things would get better after they were married. Oh, honey, Ruby said softly. Things never get better with people like this. They only get worse. Jessica made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. Everyone is misunderstanding this. I love Eleanor. I was just trying to help her become more independent. The room erupted in scoffs and harsh laughter. Ruby's recorded evidence had made it impossible for anyone to believe Jessica's lies. Marcus pulled the engagement ring from his pocket. He'd been planning to present it to Jessica during her toast. Instead, he set it on the table in front of her. The engagement is off, he said simply. I want you to leave my house and never come back. Jessica stared at the ring, then at Marcus, then at all the faces around the table looking at her with disgust and contempt. For a moment, it seemed like she might continue fighting, but then something inside her seemed to collapse. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door, pausing only to hiss at Ruby, You'll regret this. All of you will regret this. Ruby just smiled serenely. I don't think so, honey. I sleep very well at night knowing I've done the right thing. After Jessica left, slamming the front door behind her, the dining room remained quiet for several long moments. Finally, Mrs. Patterson broke the silence. Ruby, she said warmly, that was the most courageous thing I've ever seen anyone do. Ruby shrugged modestly. I just did what needed to be done. This family has been good to me for 15 years. It was time for me to be good to them. As the guests began to process what had just happened, Marcus realized that Ruby had not only saved his mother from continued abuse, she had saved him from making the biggest mistake of his life. The aftermath of Jessica's departure left the dining room in a strange mix of shock and relief. Marcus looked around at his guests, family members and friends who had come to celebrate what they thought would be a joyous engagement, only to witness the dramatic unraveling of a relationship built on lies and cruelty. Mr. Henderson was the first to speak, his voice gentle but serious. "Marcus, I hope you know that what we just witnessed won't affect your standing at the firm. If anything, it shows the kind of character and family values we respect." Marcus nodded gratefully. He'd been worried that the scandal might hurt his chances for promotion, but his boss's words reassured him that doing the right thing wouldn't cost him professionally. Mrs. Patterson had moved her chair closer to Eleanor and was holding her hand. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "I wish you had told us what was happening. You shouldn't have had to endure that treatment alone." Eleanor wiped her eyes with a tissue Ruby had quietly provided. "I was so ashamed," she admitted. "I kept thinking that maybe I really was becoming a burden, that maybe Jessica was right about me needing more care than Marcus could provide." Ruby knelt down beside Eleanor's wheelchair, her voice firm but loving. "Mrs. Eleanor, you listen to me. You are not a burden to anyone. You are a blessing to this family and to everyone who knows you. Don't you ever let anyone make you feel otherwise." David's wife Sarah nodded emphatically. "Ruby's absolutely right. Aunt Eleanor, you've been nothing but kind and generous to all of us. You babysat our kids, you remembered every birthday and anniversary. You've been the heart of this family since Uncle Robert passed." Marcus felt overwhelmed with emotion as he watched his family rally around his mother. For months he'd been blind to what was happening right under his nose, while Ruby had been quietly protecting Eleanor and gathering evidence of Jessica's abuse. "Ruby," Marcus said, his voice thick with gratitude, "I don't know how to thank you for what you did tonight. You saved my mother, and you saved me from making a terrible mistake." Ruby stood up and smoothed her apron, looking slightly embarrassed by all the attention. "I just did what anyone would do for people they love," she said simply. "No," said David firmly, "not anyone would do what you did. Most people would have minded their own business or maybe gossiped about it, but they wouldn't have had the courage to actually document evidence and expose the truth like that." The photographer, who had been quietly packing up his equipment, approached the group. "I hope you don't mind me saying this, but I've photographed a lot of family events over the years and I've never seen anything like what just happened. That woman was evil and you," he nodded at Ruby, "you're a hero." Ruby waved off the compliment, but Marcus could see she was touched by the recognition. For 15 years she had been the backbone of their household, but she'd always remained in the background, never seeking praise or acknowledgement for her dedication. As the evening progressed, the mood in the house began to shift from shock to something approaching celebration. The guests had initially been unsure whether to stay or leave after Jessica's dramatic exit, but Eleanor had insisted they remain. "Please," she had said, "don't let that woman ruin our evening. We have so much to be grateful for, especially Ruby's courage and Marcus's good judgment." The caterers had prepared enough food for a party, and it seemed wrong to let it go to waste. More importantly, Marcus realized that while they weren't celebrating an engagement anymore, they were celebrating something much more valuable, the strength of family bonds and the triumph of truth over deception. Ruby had returned to the kitchen to oversee the serving of dessert, but the guests kept finding reasons to seek her out, wanting to thank her personally for what she'd done. Marcus noticed that she handled the attention with her characteristic grace, accepting thanks modestly while deflecting praise back to the importance of protecting family. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, each person made a point of saying goodbye to both Eleanor and Ruby. Mrs. Patterson lingered the longest, making plans to visit Eleanor the following week. "I'm going to be coming by more often," she told Eleanor firmly, "not because I think you need looking after, but because I've missed spending time with my dear friend." After the last guest had gone and the caterers had finished cleaning up, Marcus found himself alone in the living room with his mother and Ruby. Eleanor looked more relaxed than she had in months, while Ruby was carefully folding the cloth napkins that had been used during dinner. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, but it was heavy with everything that had happened. Marcus knew they needed to talk about what came next, but he also wanted to savor this moment of peace. For the first time in months, his mother looked truly at ease in her own home. "Ruby," Marcus said finally, "I need to ask you something and I want you to be completely honest with me." Ruby paused in her folding and looked at him attentively. Of course, honey. What do you want to know? How long have you known that Jessica wasn't the right person for me? Ruby was quiet for a moment, considering her answer carefully. I started having concerns about 6 weeks after you introduced her to us, she said slowly. It wasn't anything big at first, just little things. The way she looked at your mama when she thought no one was watching. How she never said please or thank you to me. How she always steered conversations away from your family and toward herself. Marcus nodded, encouraging her to continue. But I really knew for sure about 4 months ago, Ruby continued. You were working late and Miss Jessica came by to have dinner with your mama. I was in the kitchen cleaning up when I heard her on the phone with someone, probably one of her friends. She was laughing about how she was managing the old lady situation and talking about how she was going to clean house once you two were married. Eleanor reached out and squeezed Ruby's hand. You never told me about that phone call. I didn't want to upset you more than you already were, Ruby said gently. But that's when I decided I needed to start documenting what was really happening. I knew that if Miss Jessica was willing to talk that way about you to her friends, it was only a matter of time before she got worse when Marcus wasn't around. Marcus felt another wave of shame wash over him. While he'd been working late hours trying to build a future he thought Jessica wanted, she'd been systematically tormenting his mother and planning to exile Ruby from their lives. I should have seen it, he said, shaking his head. There were signs, weren't there? I just didn't want to see them. Ruby moved to sit on the sofa across from where Marcus was standing. Baby, you saw what she wanted you to see. People like Miss Jessica are very good at showing different faces to different people. She knew exactly how to act around you to keep you believing she was someone she wasn't. But you saw through it, Marcus pointed out. I've been around longer than you have, Ruby said with a slight smile. I've seen all kinds of people come and go in my life. Plus, I wasn't looking at her through the eyes of someone who was in love. I could see her more clearly because I wasn't emotionally invested in believing she was good. Eleanor spoke up, her voice stronger than it had been all evening. Marcus, dear, I don't want you to blame yourself for any of this. Jessica fooled a lot of people, not just you. Even Mrs. Patterson said tonight that she thought Jessica seemed lovely whenever they met. That's true, Ruby agreed. Miss Jessica was very careful to be charming when other people were around. It was only when she thought she was safe that she showed her real personality. Marcus sat down in his father's old armchair, feeling emotionally drained, but also oddly relieved. I keep thinking about our relationship, trying to figure out what was real and what was an act. Did she ever actually love me, or was I just convenient for her? Ruby and Eleanor exchanged a look, and Marcus could see they'd probably discussed this question before. I think, Ruby said carefully, that Miss Jessica loved the idea of you. You're successful, handsome, from a good family with a nice house. You were exactly the kind of man she thought she should marry. But I don't think she ever loved who you really are. What do you mean? Marcus asked. Well, Ruby continued, you're the kind of man who takes care of his mama, who values family, who treats everyone with respect regardless of their job or background. Those are beautiful qualities, but they were inconvenient for Miss Jessica's plans. She wanted the successful husband without the family responsibilities that come with loving someone who has those values. Eleanor nodded in agreement. A woman who truly loved you would have loved us too, because we're part of what makes you who you are. She would have seen caring for me as an honor, not a burden. Marcus thought about this, realizing how different his relationship with Jessica had been from his parents' marriage. His father had adored Eleanor and had always treated Ruby as an essential member of their family. There had never been any question of excluding or diminishing anyone. Love had meant expanding the circle, not shrinking it. You know what the strangest part is? Marcus said after a few minutes. I feel relieved. Heartbroken and embarrassed, but relieved. Like I've been holding my breath for months without realizing it. Ruby smiled knowingly. That's because you've been trying to make yourself smaller to fit into Miss Jessica's vision of what your life should look like. Now you can breathe again and be yourself. As they continued talking into the night, Marcus began to understand that while Jessica's betrayal was painful, Ruby's courage had given him something invaluable, the chance to build a life based on truth rather than illusion. The question now was what kind of life he wanted to create, and how he could make sure that the people who truly mattered to him knew how much he valued them. 3 weeks had passed since the engagement dinner that changed everything. Marcus had settled into a new routine, one that felt more authentic than anything he'd experienced during his relationship with Jessica. He'd started working more reasonable hours, coming home for dinner with his mother, and spending evenings talking with both Eleanor and Ruby instead of constantly being on his phone with Jessica or attending her endless social events. The house felt different too, lighter somehow. Eleanor was smiling more, laughing at Ruby's gentle teasing and even attempting to help with small tasks around the kitchen. Her physical therapy sessions were going better than they had in months, and her doctor had commented on her improved mood and energy levels. Marcus was in his home office reviewing quarterly reports when Ruby knocked on the doorframe. "Sorry to interrupt. Honey, but you have a visitor," she said, her expression carefully neutral. Marcus looked up, puzzled. He wasn't expecting anyone, and most of his friends called before stopping by. "Who is it?" he asked. "Miss Jessica," Ruby replied simply. "She's on the front porch, says she needs to talk to you." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. He'd successfully avoided all of Jessica's calls and text messages since that night, but he'd known eventually she would try to contact him in person. "Do you want me to tell her you're not available?" Ruby offered, though her tone suggested she hoped he would say yes. Marcus considered this for a moment. Part of him wanted to avoid the confrontation entirely, but he also knew that leaving things unresolved would only prolong the situation. "No," he said finally. "I'll talk to her. But could you stay nearby? I don't want her in the house, but I also don't want to be completely alone with her." Ruby nodded approvingly. "I'll be in the kitchen with the door open. If you need anything, just call out." Marcus walked to the front door, taking a deep breath before opening it. Jessica stood on the porch wearing a simple black dress and minimal makeup, a stark contrast to her usual polished appearance. She looked like she'd been crying, and Marcus felt a brief stab of sympathy before remembering the recording of her voice tormenting his mother. "Hello, Marcus," she said quietly. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." "What do you want, Jessica?" Marcus asked, not moving to invite her inside. "I want to apologize," she said, tears starting to form in her eyes. "I know what I did was wrong, and I've been thinking about it every day since that night. I was stressed about the wedding, and I took it out on your mother. It was inexcusable." Marcus studied her face, looking for signs of genuine remorse, but something about her apology felt rehearsed, like she'd practiced it in the mirror. "You're sorry you got caught," Marcus said bluntly. "If Ruby hadn't recorded you, you would have continued treating my mother badly, and I never would have known." Jessica's carefully composed expression flickered. "That's not true. I was planning to get better, to work on my patience. Planning a wedding is incredibly stressful, Marcus. Surely you can understand that people sometimes say things they don't mean when they're overwhelmed." "For 3 months?" Marcus asked. Ruby said this had been going on for 3 months. "That's not a momentary lapse in judgment, Jessica. That's a pattern of deliberate cruelty." Jessica stepped closer, reaching out as if to touch his arm, but Marcus stepped back. "Please," she said, her voice breaking. "I know I made mistakes, but we can work through this. I love you, Marcus. We had plans, dreams for our future together. Don't throw that all away because of some misunderstandings." "Misunderstandings?" Marcus repeated, his voice rising slightly. "You called my mother a burden. You said she belonged in a home. You planned to fire Ruby, who has been like family to us for 15 years. Those weren't misunderstandings, Jessica. That was you showing me who you really are." Through the open door, Marcus could hear the quiet sounds of Ruby moving around the kitchen, and he found the familiar presence comforting. Jessica seemed to realize that her emotional appeal wasn't working, and her tone shifted to something more calculating. "Fine," she said, wiping her eyes. "Maybe I was too direct about your mother's situation, but Marcus, you have to admit that Eleanor's care needs are only going to increase as she gets older. Are you really planning to sacrifice your entire life to be her caregiver? What about traveling, having children of our own, building a life together?" "I'm not sacrificing anything," Marcus said firmly. "Taking care of the people you love isn't a sacrifice, it's a privilege. And I'm not Eleanor's caregiver. Ruby helps with the day-to-day care, and my mother is still very independent in many ways." "Ruby won't be around forever," Jessica pointed out. "She's 60 years old. What happens when she can't work anymore? Are you prepared to give up your career to take care of both of them?" Marcus felt a flash of anger at the way Jessica reduced Ruby to just another burden to be managed. "Ruby is family," he said coldly. "When the time comes that she needs care, she'll receive it with the same love and respect she's shown us for 15 years. That's what families do, Jessica. They take care of each other. Jessica's mask slipped completely then, revealing the calculating woman Ruby had recorded. You're being naive, Marcus. Love doesn't pay for medical bills or round-the-clock care. You think you're being noble, but you're actually being selfish. Eleanor would be better off in a professional facility where trained people can help her, and Ruby needs to start thinking about retirement. There it is, Marcus said quietly. The real Jessica, the one who thinks money is more important than love, who sees people as problems to be solved rather than human beings to be cherished. Jessica realized she'd revealed too much and tried to backtrack. I didn't mean it like that. I just think we need to be practical about— No, Marcus interrupted. I think we need to be honest. You never loved me, Jessica. You loved the idea of being married to someone successful, living in a nice house, having the kind of life that would impress your friends. But you never loved the actual me, the man who comes with a family that includes an elderly mother and a woman who's been our housekeeper for 15 years. Jessica's face hardened as she realized her attempts at manipulation weren't working. You're going to regret this. Marcus, she said, her voice turning cold. You think you're choosing love, but you're actually choosing limitation. You could have had everything with me. Travel, freedom, a real partnership. Instead, you're choosing to be trapped in this house with two old women who are just going to drag you down. The cruelty in her voice was so clear that Marcus actually felt sorry for her. She genuinely didn't understand that what she saw as limitations he saw as blessings. I'm not trapped, Jessica, he said sadly. For the first time in months, I'm free. Free to be myself. Free to love the people who actually matter to me. Free to build a life based on truth instead of pretense. Jessica stared at him for a long moment, seeming to realize that nothing she could say would change his mind. Fine, she said finally, her voice bitter. But don't come crying to me when you realize what you've given up. And don't expect me to take you back when you finally see that I was right about everything. As she turned to leave, Marcus felt only relief. The woman walking away from his house was a stranger to him now, and he couldn't understand how he'd ever thought he loved her. He watched her drive away, then went back inside to find Ruby and Eleanor waiting in the living room, both looking concerned. Everything okay, baby? Ruby asked gently. Marcus sat down with them, feeling lighter than he had in weeks. Everything's perfect, he said, and meant it completely. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the kitchen making Sunday breakfast, a tradition he'd started after Jessica left his life. The morning sun streamed through the windows, highlighting the fresh flowers Ruby had arranged on the windowsill. The house hummed with the comfortable sounds of a family starting their day together. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table reading the newspaper aloud, sharing interesting articles with Ruby, who was mixing batter for her famous blueberry pancakes. Their easy conversation and shared laughter filled the space with warmth that Marcus had almost forgotten was possible. Listen to this, Eleanor said, adjusting her reading glasses. The library is starting a new program for seniors to share their life stories with local high school students. They want volunteers to be interviewed about their experiences growing up in the area. Ruby looked up from her mixing bowl with interest. That sounds wonderful, Mrs. Eleanor. You have so many stories about how this town used to be. Remember when you used to tell Marcus about the old department store downtown, and how everyone dressed up just to go shopping? Marcus smiled as he flipped bacon in the pan. His mother had indeed shared countless stories about their small town's history, stories that Jessica had always found boring and old-fashioned. Now he realized how precious those memories were, and how important it was to preserve them. I think you should volunteer for that program, Mom, Marcus said, bringing her a fresh cup of coffee. You'd be amazing at it, and it would get you out of the house more, meeting new people. Eleanor's face lit up with enthusiasm. Do you really think so? I worry that young people wouldn't be interested in hearing about life 50 years ago. Are you kidding? Ruby laughed. Honey, you lived through more changes than any generation in history. These kids would be fascinated to hear about life before computers and cell phones and all that technology. As they continued planning Eleanor's potential involvement in the program, Marcus reflected on how much their lives had improved since Jessica's departure. His mother had regained her confidence and independence, participating more actively in decisions about her care and showing interest in activities outside the house. Ruby had also flourished in the months since the engagement disaster. Without the stress of protecting Eleanor from Jessica's abuse while pretending everything was normal, she seemed more relaxed and open. She'd started taking evening classes at the community college, something she'd always wanted to do but never had time for. Marcus himself had received the promotion he'd been working toward, and his boss had made it clear that his handling of the Jessica situation had actually impressed the partners. Mr. Henderson had told him privately that a man who would stand up for his family's dignity was exactly the kind of person they wanted representing their firm. The doorbell rang, interrupting his thoughts. Ruby wiped her hands on her apron and headed toward the front door. "I'll get it," she called over her shoulder. "It's probably Mrs. Patterson with those library forms she promised to bring by." But instead of Mrs. Patterson's familiar voice, Marcus heard Ruby greeting someone he didn't recognize. "Marcus." "Honey," Ruby called from the front hall. "There's someone here to see you." Curious, Marcus walked to the front door to find Ruby talking with a woman about his age with kind brown eyes and a warm smile. She was holding a clipboard and wearing a volunteer badge from the local hospital. "Hi," the woman said, extending her hand to Marcus. "I'm Dr. Sarah Chen from the Community Health Clinic. I'm here because your neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, recommended your family for a program we're starting." Marcus shook her hand, noting her firm handshake and direct gaze. "What kind of program?" "We're launching a new initiative to support families who are caring for elderly relatives at home," Dr. Chen explained. "Mrs. Patterson told us about your situation and how well your family has managed your mother's care since her stroke. We'd love to interview you about what's worked well and also offer some additional resources that might be helpful." Ruby smiled knowingly. Mrs. Patterson never could resist bragging about families she thinks are doing things right. "Come on in, doctor. Would you like some coffee? We were just making breakfast." As Dr. Chen followed them into the kitchen, Marcus noticed how naturally she interacted with both Ruby and Eleanor. She didn't speak loudly or slowly to his mother, didn't treat Ruby like hired help, and seemed genuinely interested in learning about their family dynamic. "This is lovely," Dr. Chen said, looking around the kitchen. "You can really feel the warmth in this house. That's actually exactly what we're hoping to understand better. How some families create environments where everyone thrives, regardless of age or physical limitations." Eleanor beamed at the compliment. "Well, we've had a lot of help," she said, reaching over to squeeze Ruby's hand. "Ruby here is the real secret to our success. She's been part of our family for 15 years, and Mrs. Eleanor makes it easy," Ruby replied warmly. "She's never treated me like just an employee. We're family, plain and simple." Dr. Chen made notes on her clipboard as they talked, asking thoughtful questions about their daily routines, how they'd adapted the house for Eleanor's needs, and what challenges they'd faced along the way. "I have to ask," Dr. Chen said at one point, "because this is so different from many situations I've seen. How do you handle disagreements or stress? Caregiving can be emotionally demanding." Marcus and Ruby exchanged a quick glance, both thinking of Jessica's attempts to portray their family situation as burdensome. "Honestly," Marcus said, "taking care of my mother has never felt like a burden because we approach it as a team. Ruby handles the day-to-day medical needs and household management. I take care of finances and transportation, and Mom contributes by staying as independent as possible and helping with decisions about her care. Plus," Ruby added, "we talk about everything openly. If something isn't working, we figure out a better way, and we make sure everyone has time for their own interests too." Dr. Chen nodded approvingly. That level of communication and mutual respect is exactly what makes the difference between families that struggle and families that thrive. As the conversation continued, Marcus found himself genuinely enjoying Dr. Chen's company. She was intelligent, compassionate, and had a great sense of humor. When Eleanor started telling stories about Ruby's attempts to teach her how to use a smartphone, Dr. Chen laughed so hard she nearly spilled her coffee. "I should probably let you get back to your Sunday breakfast," Dr. Chen said eventually. "But would it be possible to schedule a more formal interview sometime this week? What you've created here could really help other families who are facing similar situations." "Of course," Eleanor said immediately. "We'd be honored to help other families. Wouldn't we, Ruby?" Ruby nodded enthusiastically. "Anything we can do to help folks understand that taking care of family doesn't have to be a burden." As Dr. Chen prepared to leave, she turned to Marcus with a slightly shy smile. "I hope this isn't inappropriate, but Would you be interested in having dinner sometime? I mean, to discuss the program further, but also—" She trailed off, looking uncertain. Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. It had been months since he'd even thought about dating, but there was something about Dr. Chen that appealed to him immediately. "I'd like that very much," he said, smiling back at her. "Sarah, right?" "Right. And you can call me Sarah when we're not talking about the program." After she left, Marcus returned to the kitchen to find Ruby and Eleanor grinning at him knowingly. "What?" he asked, though he was smiling too. "Oh, nothing," Ruby said innocently, returning to her pancake batter. "Just nice to see you talking to a woman who appreciates family values." Eleanor nodded in agreement. "She seems lovely, Marcus. And did you notice how she treated Ruby and me? Like we were real people worth listening to?" Marcus had noticed, and it made all the difference in the world. As he finished making breakfast for his family, he felt grateful for Ruby's courage 6 months ago. Her willingness to expose Jessica's true nature hadn't just saved him from a disastrous marriage, it had cleared the path for him to find someone who might actually be worthy of the love he had to offer. The future felt bright and full of possibilities, built on the solid foundation of truth, respect, and genuine care that had always been the Williams family way.